Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology Prospecting Method. I'm also known as the Queen of Cold Call. My very special guest today is Collin Mitchell. He is the Vice President of Sales at Leadium, and he is a 4-time founder, very passionate about sales, entrepreneurship, and podcasting. He is the Vice President of Sales at Leadium, where they're helping sellers personalize the entire sales process to build more rapport and close more deals. Collin is also the host of the Sales Transformation podcast and newsletter. Collin's going to be interviewing me down the line on the Sales Transformation podcast. And here's the thing that's most interesting to me right now is he started with nothing but managed to grow his first business from zero to $5 million in annual recurring revenue in just 26 months. He's been in sales for 13 years, serving the SaaS industry, and he currently manages 5 salespeople. So welcome, Collin.
Wendy, thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to it and looking forward to having the queen of cold calling herself on my show as well soon.
Cool. I look forward to that. But in the meantime, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire on my podcast today. So let's begin at the beginning. How did you get into sales? How did you end up at Leadium? How did you grow your businesses? What's the backstory?
Yeah. So I was raised by a single mom, 4 boys, one of 4. And, my mom did the best she could to pay the bills and keep food on the table. And sometimes we came up short. And, as a young kid, life was a bit of a struggle. So I didn't go to college, didn't get a fancy job, frankly, didn't really have anybody, telling me that, school was important. So, I just got an ordinary job out of high school, and I wasn't the most responsible young adult. So I had to practically beg for my first sales job. My stepdad was in sales, and he basically got my foot in the door in that job. And I knew it was my way out of sort of living check to check and having a very similar adulthood as my childhood. So I made the most of it, which kind of looked like me being the first one in the office every single day, last one to leave every single day, and coming in on the weekend to send proposals, to get my leads ready for the following week. And that's what I did for, 12 months straight, worked my way up to one of the top, full cycle AEs there. And then after that, got my first VP of sales position where, I learned a little bit more business acumen, got some more experience, learned how to recruit and train people. And then shortly after that, my wife and I started our first business where we grew that from 0 to 5 million in 26 months.
Well, that's truly, truly amazing. And I have to ask you, because when I was introducing you, I was looking at your official bio. And in your official bio, you were talking about Leadium, and you say that Leadium helps sellers personalize the entire sales process to build more rapport and close more deals. And certainly more rapport, more closed deals, those are good things. But what exactly does personalize the entire sales process mean to you and to Leadium?
Yeah. So, the thing is, Leadium helps companies, mostly B2B, mostly tech and SaaS, with their top of funnel challenges. So that could be, hey, we get a ton of leads and we need to qualify those and we need to book them. Or it could be, we need somebody to handle our, outbound go-to-market strategy. The challenge with outbound prospecting today is very few know how to personalize it well. And so we run very much an account-based marketing sort of approach, very much of the school of thought of quality over quantity. Most people think we need more leads, but rarely is it actually that they need more leads. A lot of times is they need to work the leads that they have more effectively and get better at qualifying and disqualifying. So a good outbound strategy comes down to a lot of things. And the first piece is really honing in on who your ideal customer profile is. And once you can do that, you can build messaging that resonates with them. And you really want to personalize every touch point and not drone through a phone script that sounds the same no matter who's on the other side of the phone, or send, thousands of people a super bland generic email. So personalization starts at the top of the funnel, and it should continue throughout the entire sales process.
Well, I love this because I kind of feel like I hear myself talking. Let's talk about that ideal customer profile. How do you determine because we're talking about ideal, not like any old customer profile. It's what's the ideal. And I find, as someone who works with salespeople and does training, that's really hard. Mm-hmm. It's a really hard concept to grasp. It's ideal, not any old customer. So how do you do that?
Yeah. And I'm sure, with your experience working with teams, you hear a lot of, oh, we're industry agnostic, or we can work with anybody, or, any small business, or, and a lot of these very like broad stroke sort of responses when you ask people around who their ideal customer profile is. And for whatever reason, people think that going broad is better, and it's not. The more narrow you can be, the more specific you can be, the more successful you can be in penetrating your total addressable market. And you don't have to be married to that ideal customer profile forever. It can change, it can evolve, or you can, have a good amount of success within that specific niche and then move on to another. But to build a sound strategy specifically for outbound, going as narrow as possible is better. And that could be things like, obviously there's the basics: geography, company size, employee size, revenue size. But then we can segment that down even further. Maybe there's certain technologies that they use. Maybe there's certain jobs that they have or don't have, or maybe they're hiring for specific roles. Maybe there's funding rounds, could be another segmentation point. Another one that is often missed is what specific challenges do they have, right? So that's a little bit harder to source from a data standpoint. But if you can segment down as much as possible, then your messaging, your script, your talk track can be around uncovering those specific problems, because you know that if they have that specific problem, they fall into that bucket of your ideal customer profile.
Yes, if you're doing outbound, I mean, this is kind of like real life. What you say has to be relevant to the person you say it to. And so when you narrow your focus, you're able to do that. You're going to be able to create that message that resonates. And you can have multiple niches. You simply have to be directed in each one.
Yeah. The problem is people try to bunch them up together and work them the same way, right? So if they say, hey, I can work with this industry and this industry and this industry and this job title and this job title and this job title, well, I have this very broad target, and any messaging that you build is either going to resonate to one and not the other, or be very generic and broad and not appeal to anyone.
Exactly. One of the questions that I am asked all the time, people that are doing outbound, they say, what should I say if the prospect says, I'm not interested? Mm-hmm. And it always kind of makes me laugh, because if everybody you talk to says, I'm not interested, and you are 100% sure that you've narrowed your focus and you're talking to the right people, that means they don't think you're saying anything interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, I think that can also be a little bit tricky for people, because, not interested is commonly used as a brush off, right? And if already going into it, majority of the people that you reach out to are going to say they're not interested. But it's your job as the seller to find out, okay, are they genuinely not interested with a valid reason? Meaning, depending on what you say, let's say you sell I don't know, CRM, and they just signed a 3-year contract with their CRM provider. Okay, that's not interested with a valid reason. No reason to follow up, right? Or are they not interested because, like you said, Wendy, you're not saying anything interesting, or they're just trying to brush you off and get you off the phone? Those are two very different things with the same response. So you got to dig in just a little bit. And you obviously want to do it with some tact, right? So you might say, hey, Wendy, totally understand. I kind of figured that when I called you. But just curious, I've been doing this a long time. Is there a specific reason why you're not interested? Or are you really just, trying to, get me off the phone here? Cause either way, I would love to know. And so you can kind of, say it with a chuckle, be a little bit tactful, but there's some ways to kind of dig a little bit deeper and identify, is it a brush off or is there a genuine reason why they're not interested?
Yes. And I would add to that if I'm making a lot of outbound calls and I'm getting, I'm not interested, I'm not interested, I'm not interested, I'm going to take a step back and rework my script.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you got to look for those patterns, and, if your value prop isn't landing with anybody and you're getting a lot of not interested, I mean, what's the first thing that you would suggest somebody looks at, Wendy, to rework their messaging?
Well, the first question that I always want to ask is, what's the problem that the people you're reaching out to, what's the problem that they have that you can fix, and how do they talk about it? Mm-hmm. Not how do you talk about it, because every industry has its own jargon, and it is unlikely that your prospects speak the same jargon. So it would be like doing outbound in Chinese, but your prospects don't speak Chinese. It's a problem. So what's their problem? How do they talk about it? You use their language. And when you get it right, because people engage. Even if they just bought that CRM, they talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's definitely a art to speaking the language of your prospects, right? And sometimes that takes time, right? You may not know what that language is until you get some reps in, make some calls, get some feedback, get into some conversations. That's why, I think a lot of people go into cold calling thinking that, hey, my goal is to book meetings. Well, sometimes you're not even quite there yet, right? It could be helping you redefine your messaging. It could be testing your targeting. Cold calling, cold outbound is a very effective way to test these things. What's your alternative? Go spend a bunch of money on ads and see what performs. It's a very efficient, very effective way where you can get some real-time feedback to see, is my targeting right? Is my messaging working? Is it off? Do I need to make some adjustments? And those are all wins if you're redefining your messaging to land on something that finally works as well.
Oh, absolutely. So we are both proponents of cold calling.
Yes.
I have to ask you, what do you see? I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years. I started doing business development on behalf of clients. I segued into doing sales training, but I have been working in this space for about 25 years. Things have really changed. What are the changes that you see?
Yeah. So it's interesting because, you hear a lot of things and people say a lot of stuff about cold calling, whether it works, doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. But it's, to me right now, I mean, we've at Ledium, we've worked with over 1,000 companies. We work with, 50, 55 companies at any time. And I would say the biggest change that we've seen is the phone is more effective than it's ever been. Partially because I think, a lot of people don't pick up the phone. A lot of people want that easy silver bullet, whether it's leveraging social or cold email. And I'm not saying that those are bad channels because we use them, but they're a little bit less effective. And the thing that I love most about the phone is you can get real-time feedback, right? If you send a cold email and somebody doesn't reply, it doesn't really tell you much. You don't know if it got in their inbox. You don't know if it just got lost. They're busy. There's so many variables of why they did not reply to that email. Where if you pick up the phone, your value prop and your messaging doesn't land, or you get into a conversation, you can get some feedback to make those adjustments. So the thing that I would say has changed the most, though, with the phone is it's not just get a list and call a bunch of names, right? You really need to have a sound strategy. And that's from having really good data. And so my recommendation there is don't rely on one single source for data. Like, I don't care who you use, if it's Zoom Info, Seamless, Lead IQ, whatever. There's so many. I think there's like 250 data providers now. Use 2, if even 3, if you can, to get good, accurate data. And the most important thing there is getting good, accurate mobile data. Because the difference is, if you use one data provider, you're going to get about a 30% coverage, meaning if you source 1,000 leads, you're going to get 300 direct dials and mobiles. And even of those 300, they may not all be valid. Where if you use 2 or 3 like we do, you're going to get 70 to 80% coverage on direct dials and mobiles. And that makes a huge difference in having more conversations. So good data is the first piece. Good technology, right? You're not just picking up manually dialing. That could be a power dialer, a parallel dialer, whatever the case is. And what we actually start to see is for every 8 to 14 phone calls we make, we talk to a prospect, which is, on average about a 10% dial to connect ratio.
Okay. I love where this conversation is going, Collin. And we're going to pause now for a word from our sponsor. But when we come back, I want to talk some more about the phone and why the phone is not dead and why the phone works and all those good things.
Yes.
But now we're going to pause for a word from our sponsor, Salesology 3X Appointments. You know how frustrating and stressful it is when you leave every sales meeting wondering if your sales team knows how to sell because they're not selling and all you ever hear from them are excuses. They blame your marketing. They say you need to do more social media, and they say you need a new website. You know something's wrong. You don't quite know what it is. And you're even starting to wonder if it's you. You don't have a lot of options. You could just fire them all and start from scratch. That would be expensive. And you're really sick of waking up in the middle of the night wondering how to fix this. Well, imagine instead that you have an easy-to-use, replicable system that ensures that your team can easily schedule qualified appointments. And imagine that your team is excited and motivated. No more excuses, and you feel good. Salesology 3X Appointments can make that happen. If you're a business owner or a sales manager with an underperforming sales team, let's talk. Click on the link to my calendar in the show notes, schedule a time, and I look forward to meeting you. And we are back with my very special guest, Collin Mitchell, who is the Vice President of Sales at Leadium. And we are talking all things cold calling. So, Collin, one of the things that I'd like your opinion on this, but what I tell my clients is that if you pick up the phone and you reach out to your prospects, 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, before COVID, you call up a prospect, and if you don't have a great script with great delivery, they say, do you know how many salespeople called me today? Mm-hmm. I can pretty much guarantee you, if you pick up the phone and you reach out to prospects, they don't say that. What do you think? There's not a lot of people doing outbound.
It's interesting because I think that people are a little bit more open to having conversations over the phone for a couple of reasons. One, exactly what you said. They're not getting as many calls as they used to. Two, with a lot of folks working from home on Zoom all day, sometimes it's a little refreshing to just connect with another human and have a conversation. So you'd be surprised how open people are to having a conversation over the phone. And it starts with just picking it up, right? And for whatever reason, phone reluctance is rampant in a lot of sales organizations. But you're also starting to see, especially in like tech and SaaS, which can be its own little bubble sometimes and not kind of the standard, you're starting to see the full cycle rep come back, right? A lot of time, for a long time, there's been this AE to SDR, BDR sort of ratio, but you're starting to see AEs, have to self-source and do prospecting more than they had to before. And I think it's good for the sales profession.
Oh, I think it's incredible for the sales profession because cold calling is a very foundational skill. The ability to speak with somebody that you do not know, get their attention, and their agreement to engage, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very fundamental communication skill. It's fundamental to being a successful salesperson is to get people to engage with you. And so having that skill set is transformational.
Yeah, and I don't remember the exact numbers. I wish I did, but I know the data out there is self-sourced deals have a higher chance of closing. And if you own that relationship all the way from the cold call to the close, you've built a relationship, you have full context into everything, rather than this sort of constant handoff. So that's a good enough reason if you want to increase your win rate and increase your close rate, then start self-sourcing more of your own deals.
And know that your competitors, it's unlikely they're calling your prospects. And you're making that human being to human being connection, which you cannot make in an email.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And there was research that was done at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. It was back in 2015, but they tested written communication against spoken communication. And so written communication is like an email, a letter, social media post.
Right.
Spoken communication is on a Zoom call, or you're face to face, or you're on the phone, or even a voicemail. They discovered if people hear you talk, one, they think you're smarter, and two, they're more likely to take action on whatever it is you're talking about. So all the more reason to pick up the telephone.
Yeah, we're just giving you more and more reason to pick up the phone here. So, and we're just gonna keep laying it on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you say to a sales organization that has a whole bunch of salespeople that have call reluctance? What is the answer to that? Do you have one?
It's actually simple. It's lead from the trenches. You want your team to pick up the phone and make calls with them. And some sales leaders might be like, whoa, wasn't expecting that. Well, I like to lead by example. I've made over 500,000 cold calls in my career, and I was just making cold calls on Friday with a group of our SDRs. And it's something that I frankly enjoy doing. And sometimes when you haven't done it for a little while, because honestly, it'd been like a few weeks since I had made any cold calls, you're like, oh, I forgot how much I actually enjoy this. Just connecting with people, building relationships, having conversations. The biggest thing about cold calling is like, what's the worst that's going to happen? They hang up on you. So what? You just make another call. For whatever reason, people have this fear around like rejection and getting hung up on. And, if you're a professional and you have some tact in the way that you pursue conversations with people, worst that's going to happen is they're going to hang up on you. It's not that big of a deal. And so if you're a leader or founder and your sales team isn't making calls like you'd like them to, then block out some time and make some calls with them.
I love that advice. I know maybe you have encountered this, because I have encountered many, many sales leaders that will say to their team, this is a distasteful task. This is a horrible task. Nobody likes to cold call, but here's your list. Go cold call. Yeah. And that doesn't really set anybody up to be very successful. No. So the idea that you're doing it with them. What about process? How important is process?
Oh, I love that you asked that question, because that was like the next thing that I was thinking on my mind, because you said something that's really important there, is the mindset around it, right? So if you're a leader that's, putting that negativity out there, like you mentioned, your team's not going to be that excited to make calls. And the other thing is, if you don't have good data, if you don't have good process, if you don't have good technology to enable them and empower them to do cold calling, they're going to hate their job. And nobody does their best work if they hate their job. So you got to set them up for success. And that's, having a positive mindset around it, having a good culture around cold calling and prospecting, having good process around it. And then also, data is huge. If somebody's sitting there and making a bunch of calls, maybe maybe they make 200 calls and they only have one or two conversations, they're not going to enjoy that, right? But if you have good data, and every, 8, 10, 14 calls that they make, they're having a conversation with somebody, then it's a lot more sustainable. It's a lot more enjoyable for that person. So, you got to think about, a lot of times people will cut short on budget around some of these things like good data and technology. And it is worth spending a little bit more to have good data and to have good technology, because your team is going to actually have more success, enjoy doing it, and you will see a significant more of an ROI than cutting back and only having one data provider, having them manually dial and all of these things. Because ultimately you want to look at your numbers of like, how much are you spending to get to a conversation? How many of those conversations are converting to meetings? How many of those meetings are converting to opportunity, and so on? So you got to look at it sort of whole picture here.
Absolutely. And I will say, in doing this for 25 years, I've never had anybody die from cold calling. Like, not one person, not one person. And personal note, I will add that if someone hangs up on me, I have been known to call them back and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we got disconnected."
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just the mindset. When people talk about this topic, it's almost always talked about in terms of love it or hate it.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's such a silly conversation, because I also enjoy cold calling. I think it's really fun. But the opposite of hating to cold call is not that you now love it. The opposite is that you're neutral, so you can execute. And part of that just comes from a process. And what I have experienced in the years I've been doing this is that for most people that have call reluctance, if they have a really good process that they are following, and they know what they're going to do every step along the way, a lot of that call reluctance goes away.
Yeah. And then another thing to add to that, which is actually just a really simple thing, but I'm sure that you see this as often missed too, is you got to have it in the calendar. You got to have those call blocks. And I feel silly even saying this because it's such a simple concept, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do this. And for some people that might be first thing in the morning, right? Or right before lunch or right after lunch, or multiple blocks throughout the day. So whether those are individual call blocks, team call blocks, leading from the front in the trenches with your sales leader call blocks, whatever the call blocks are that, the team collectively is agreeing to, needs to be locked in the calendar, and they need to be protected, meaning nothing gets scheduled in that time window.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Follow the money. What's closest to getting paid, to making that sale and making that commission? It's like talking to prospects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Collin, if people want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Yeah. I mean, first thing they can do is look, I know how much work it is to put together a good quality podcast like this. So the best thing that they can do first to show their gratitude for you, giving back to the sales community and putting together an awesome show, is to write a review for this show, subscribe to the show, share it with their friends. That's the best way they can show your gratitude. And then if you're somebody who really enjoys podcasts, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, you can check out Sales Transformation, where we drop daily, almost daily sales content. And from there, you can find everything about me, the podcast, the newsletter, Leadium, anything else that you might be looking for.
Yes, it is a terrific podcast, and I am really excited and honored that I'm going to be interviewed soon. And also LinkedIn. People can connect with you on LinkedIn. So we're going to put your LinkedIn link, your profile, in the show notes. So if you want to connect with Collin through LinkedIn, go to the show notes. After you finish listening, go to the show notes, click on the link. We will also put in the link for Leadium, and we will also put in a link to help you find Collin's Sales Transformation podcast. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the links. And you have been listening. Thank you for listening to Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders with my very special guest, Collin Mitchell. And if you've found value in listening to today's podcast, then think about one business owner, one sales professional, one sales leader, somebody that you know that you think might also find value in listening to this podcast. And please do share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.